we just welcome John?
To say one of the first most important skills of peace building is to remain calm under pressure. You may not have noticed, but just over a year I was talking to, I think it's Mark, isn't it?
Yeah.
We see it today by putting my PowerPoint onto his email because this can't connect to a Mac. So yeah, I remain reasonably calm. So yeah, I have, as I did on Thursday, I want to start with like a preamble, kind of something which gets us thinking about some of the ideas which I'm going to cover in the presentation that will follow. The presentation itself is going to introduce a new idea, I think. Maybe it isn't, I don't know, you never know what's new these days, but a new idea for education as well, very much for us in art education, called meaning-centered learning. And it's a bit of a shift. I'm asking for a shift, a kind of a turn away from what I see as a quite challenging, and you could say corrupted idea, beautiful idea as it was in its first instance, of child-centered or student-centered learning. And I think I give reasonable cause for that to happen in these times. So, that's not it, but we'll make it in somewhere else. So, the preamble. Last Thursday, I left us with the challenge of making this abstractness, which I talked about, of peace, into a concrete form. And I know this was a big ask over a short period of time. I was really delighted to see some of the examples of work filtering through a little Padlet. Lovely to see. And it just shows you how we can do these things. It's incredible. And once again, the works made provide hard evidence, not soft, but hard evidence of the power and the language of art to transcend complex, and the power of the language of art to transcend the complex and bring new imaginaries into the world, and most importantly, as artist educators, to share these works with others, promote further discussion, distribution, and knowledge. So I'm going to start by thanking you all for responding, those who did respond to the call, despite this, what I call the sumophobic nature of my request, because I completely blew that one. But yeah, I really thank you for responding, and I'm sure maybe some more will join. I know I've got to put one on maybe for you, so I have a good idea about that now. So before I move to my second keynote, I need to share something with you that has actually bearing on my presentation and talk. And I wrote this morning because it is very relevant to our moment in time. I travelled to Liverpool yesterday morning from Amsterdam. My travels came in the wake of a night of street violence in the city. Some of you may be aware of it, you may have seen it on the news. The troubles were triggered by the visit of Israeli football team Maccabi Tel Aviv and their supporters to the Johan Cruyff Arena, the home of Ajax, which is in the south of Amsterdam. The reports that I've seen, both on NOS, which is the Dutch network, and BBC, seem to suggest that Amsterdam, and maybe even the Netherlands, is breeding ground for anti-Semitism. Let me say that in my experience this is not true. Of Netherlands nor Amsterdam. Amsterdam is a multicultural city where many of the world's peoples live side by side. While I'm not qualified to talk about the specifics of what happened on Thursday, that's for the people on the ground to discuss, I recognise that such events highlight the growing tension that the current war in the Middle East brings to the doorsteps of Europe. The history of Europe's relationship with Judaism makes it inevitable that old and very dangerous terms begin to re-emerge. I heard the state of Israel draw a comparison to the notorious Kristallnacht in a post-history. The connection of such traumatic histories to the present day serve to highlight the importance of this conference and our ongoing work to promote a culture of peace. We do this through the combined force of art and education, using our mandate to question, understand, and transform the dangerous languages and attitudes of those who seek to divide and weaponize identity. But we bring hope, and we need hope. Later in my presentation, I'll show how the fabric of identity, which is constantly weaponized, can be unpicked and reimagined to allow new connections to be made that transcend the language of hate and division. Following on from my keynote on Thursday, I've titled this presentation Piece 2. Quite ironic actually. I got a lot of money from Piece 2 when I was working in Belfast many years ago. Piece 2 was a fund set up by the European Union to build peace and reconciliation after conflict in Ireland had ceased, which it hasn't. I will address two major issues in peace building that seem to be more relevant today and than ever. As already mentioned in my opening comments, the weaponisation of identity. I will address this by looking at a project I done many years ago in Northern Ireland. And what I also see is a major obstacle to achieving peace. That is the capitalisation and self-gain culture that dominates education in the societies of our world, and forms attitudes and behaviours that has forefronted self-interest ahead of social interest. In my view, this has led to an identity crisis, particularly for us who work in education, that has made many vulnerable to be told who they are, and most importantly, who they are not. So who are we? Surely we must know who we are. After all, we are products of a well-rounded education system that encourages us all to think and connect to our values, our purpose, and our reasoning. We have histories to draw on that to support the very foundation of our identity, and offer principles to guide us through life. Most of us in the room will have been through first, second, and third level education. So we must have found our meaning, our purpose, and recognise and live by our values. Yes, no, maybe. And if we do, then this meaning, which is ultimately rooted in notions of truth, should tell us what is right and what is wrong. So as we sit on our couches overshadowed by Banksy's print, and we watch the world unravelling in front of our eyes, and we will know then what is wrong, and even may have ideas of how to fix it. And with our educated minds, we must choose for an equal society that enables all to live in peace, with justice and security. You would think so. Why would anyone choose inequality, injustice, war, and fear? These are questions that keep me awake at night. And my simple mind can't make sense of how our world seems to choose for pain and destruction, and often in exchange for pain, loss, and insecurity of others. My sleeplessness tells me that I may be part of the scheme that enables this. I like my comforts, my security, my holidays, my job sometimes. I sometimes wonder who I am and how I did or become who I am. Touched on this in my previous talk. Our notions of who we are and our values are mostly formed out of our lived and professional experiences. And this does give me some comfort. But I also acknowledge that our identities are constructed by our education. And as such, we need to be critically conscious of the education we had and the default that this can promote in our own pedagogical journeys, be this in formal, informal, or non-formal sectors. Many would argue that our education systems reflect the society we inhabit. Thus, our society must reflect the values of the same system. However, what if that system is driven by self-gain and values that I believe derive from the mutation of a concept that we all seem to hold dear: student-centered, or people-centered, or child-centered learning? I've come to recognise that student-centered education is a victim of a culture of education driven by neoliberal values of individual gain and achievement as opposed to societal gain and growth. And while I may not be popular in saying this, I now see student-centered education as the most that provides a desired result, a self-centered society. As in my previous talk, I posit this form of education within Galton's theories of cultural and structural violence. A violence that has driven a wedge between teachers and learners, creating a service delivery model of education where students have become customers and educators have become service providers. And when the product, more often seen in assessment outcomes, goes wrong, the service providers are ultimately held to account. As Galton points out, unlike direct violence, structural and cultural violence is a violence of the unknown. It is quiet and often hidden. Students and teachers have been led to the same watering hole, only to find the taps that supply the water are turned off and on by the power of market-driven governance. In this modus, we will not achieve empathy, and our learning objective of peace will never be reached. But there are alternatives, I heard many of them at the conference breakout sessions on Thursday, and no doubt we will hear many more today. And I would like to use this platform to present one such alternative, what I have called a meaning-centered learning. Thank you for that. I'm going to take a drink of water, because there's a lot to say that in one go, and then we'll look at some stuff. I was looking for that slide yesterday online of Banksy's piece. I found it very difficult to get it without having to buy it. I found this one, which kind of made me think about the comforts of home under the shadow of such issues. So, where are we? How do we move the slides in?
Want me to scroll them?
Will it scroll? God, I miss my Mac. Yeah, I started the colorway. I think we probably all know what this thing is. Okay, as teachers of art, I'm sure we're all familiar with the colorway. In my time in teacher education at Goldsmiths, I watched how amazing young minds full of contemporary visions and methods, some are here today actually, they're out there, of contemporary visions and methods of art making were compelled to spend the obligatory 4 to 6 weeks teaching the colorway. I watched how they struggled to find their own way of doing this, and many did transform what could be seen as a dry encounter into something more meaningful. That is not to say that I'm against teaching the colorway. What I struggle with and struggle to understand is how this is given such importance and so much time is offered to it. Moving forward 20 years, I wonder how things have changed. I'm not sure. I do miss these moments of critical exploration with some of the amazing teachers and mentors I met in my time working on the PGCE. As a teacher of art, or as teachers of art, we have to make choices about how we want to spend our 60 minutes or so per week with our students, our kids. And in these times, I wonder if we need to review these choices and maybe take a segue step toward a more issues-based approach to art education. Issues-based art education, or IBAE, offers an alternative that invites us to engage in a relational endeavour to find our meaning through the connection to themes and issues relevant to our lived experiences and connect this to the world we inhabit. Going further, adding meaning to this agenda, talk to our sense of identity, who we are as social beings, and our truths. You could even say it provides a new colour to the palette, a mixture of many hues based on our sense of truth, values, purpose, reason, and meaning. The question is, how do we connect such high-minded ideas to the day-to-day mechanisms of teaching and learning? Move again.
John, would you like a slide when you sit there? You
Yeah.
can just say move.
That'd be handy. So, this particular diagram, I've had this made by made by one of my current students who's a graphic designer. She's made it into a beautiful animated graphic, which I'm going to share with everybody if you want it. And it kind of all comes together around this central force of meaning, the M in the center of it. And it shows, particularly this one, it's an older one because the graphic didn't work this morning. Nothing was working this morning. And it didn't work. So this is one which I produced a while back. And you can see in this particular one, it does talk to the institution of our test where I work. That's flexible and can be used for any institution or any situation, any encounter where we're involved in the active education and learning. So what does it say? Is the meaning? Oh, I've notes on this. There you go. Actually, I'm written on this, so that's handy. So the meaning of reading invites us to consider what it is to be human. But moreover, when applied to institutional education, it offers a conscious method of recording the multiple connections that are part of the learning journey from the self out into the world and beyond. It asks us how we construct the process of learning around people, place, and times. It reminds us to connect to the world and ensure that this connection is seen and understood. And while there are multiple layers of complexity at play in regard to the philosophical questions around truth making, I designed this prototype out of my deep connection and dedication to practice, the practice of art education. I needed something to help me untangle the multiple layers and messiness that socially engaged arts education embraces. I showed some of these in my talk the other day when I done the multiple layers of all these different visions and views and needs and hopes, and it is messy stuff. So I want to try and make sense out of that in some way. A tool that would keep me and my students on track and enable investigation and questions around meaning and truth to emerge. Ultimately, it is a wheel of connectivity, based on how the individual connects to the world and the integrated system of the universe, and just maybe account for all its wonderful diversity. I've also used the wheel to reflect and question previous work I've made, and I'd like to share one such work with you in a moment. Unlike the previous case study that I drew on, which was made by students of Artes Site-Specific College in Belfast, I showed on Thursday, this is a project drawn from my own portfolio. Therefore, it was made a few years ago, I have to say, and when I was developing my own socially engaged arts education practice in Northern Ireland. The project itself came against a backdrop of really complicated social situations I'll explain in a moment. It challenged the stuckness, what I call the stuckness of what has been termed as a single identity. The same identity model that the OICG says fuels over 80% of the world's current conflicts. So, let's move into one. There we go. That one, yeah. It deals with symbols and the language of difference head on, and also deals with the situation which was living at that moment in time, a pretty volatile situation. So, let's have a look on that. Okay, I'll stop then. At this point I'm going to stop reading. It's more interesting to talk to you. One thing to say is this project featured in my PhD portfolio, which I presented a few years ago at the University of Sunderland, which was based on work which was previously made, called previous creative output. So it was one of 5 projects that I showed in the portfolio, and one of 5 projects that I also critically evaluated and theorized in the written commentary which supported the work. So this piece of research was done in 2004. Peace agreement in Northern Ireland. I'm bringing in Northern Ireland again. I don't apologise for that. That's where I'm from, and it's where I'll always be from. Oops. So the peace agreement in Northern Ireland was signed in 1998. But the peace in itself, as I mentioned on Thursday, I think we need to sort of start to see this as a process. It's not something which we ever arrive at. We're always working on it. And in Northern Ireland, this was pretty much in its infancy. It's a very small place in Northern Ireland. I'm sure many people in the room have been there. Liverpool's just a hop and a jump to it. Its population is no more than, say, at that time around 2 million, maybe 2,200,000 or so. And when you consider that over nearly 4,000 people were killed in the period of 30 years of the conflict, and one thing you'll never hear come out of my life is the term that the English establishment like to give the Northern Ireland conflict. They called it the Troubles. Troubles is when you lose your car keys, or you get locked out of the house. People were dying day by day in Belfast and in Northern Ireland based on really distorted senses of identity. And that's what this project deals with. So we see from this research, which is done by Queen's University group of researchers, that children as young as 3 were showing attitudes and signs of sectarianism. This research was a small case study, but what it recognised was you could get a kid of 3 years of age, a toddler, and you could sit in a room or whatever, and you can give them the colour green, or something which related to a Catholic nationalist Irish tradition, and he wouldn't touch it, or she wouldn't touch it. They wouldn't like to put their hands on it. The same could be said for the children on the other side, who refused to touch things with red, white and blue in it. They were adverse to those colours. As young as 3, these attitudes were beginning to show. So you can imagine what happens as these kids grow, and they're living in the shadow of these sort of peace walls and the various different sort of paraphernalia, symbols and images that mark out the streets of divided cities such as Belfast. I think it's more intense. Next slide. So, this project that I made was in response to the killing of a 15-year-old Catholic boy who died when he was beaten by a gang in the county town of Ballymena. Ballymena is just about 25 miles from Belfast, north of Belfast. So the boy who was killed was a Catholic boy. It's a Romeo and Juliet story, who had fallen puppy love with a young Protestant girl. And he seemed to have this sort of like organisation every weekend that on a Sunday he would meet her and they'd go to cinema in town, then he would walk her home or whatever, and then he would walk from her home, her community, to across the line into the Catholic community where he lived. This was watched and noted by this gang of young boys, who eventually decided they would take it into their own hands and strike a blow for Ulster, strike a blow for Britain, and give this kid a bit of a beating. I'm saying this was one story, by the way. There are multiple stories of similar situations happening on the other side of the fence as well. That's what this type of conflict does. But I'm not going to go into offsetting here. I'm going to say it as it is about this particular project. So he was beaten, and a few days later he died in hospital. What happened after that was 5 kids, 5 teenagers, were identified as the gang members, the people who actually had caused the death of Michael. Let's call him Michael. He has a name, Michael King. And these 5 kids were arrested. They were charged with murder, and they were going to go before trial. At that time, I was in Belfast. I was working on my own practice, very quietly, below the radar, not in galleries, not working with universities or anything like that, because I was working with the Loyalist Unionist Protestant community specifically. And I'm a Catholic from a Republican Irish background. So it was always a little bit sort of, yeah, you had to watch what you said, and the work was always done below the radar. But there was another reason for me to keep it below the radar, and that's where I felt it could be most effective. Because as soon as it showed itself and started to pop up in journals or started to pop up on television, documentaries or whatever, you lost your credibility. That really was not about me, or it was about the work getting done. So I kept it quiet. I was asked, because I was pretty effective at this thing, I was asked if I would do an intervention, do a piece of work with 2 groups of the kids involved. This brings me back on reflection, not at the time. At the time, I was doing artwork with young people and thinking of what am I going to get these kids to learn about artwork. I wasn't thinking theoretically. I wasn't thinking, I wasn't reading Dalton, or I wasn't reading Ferreira. I was just doing the work. But on reflection, these are the things which I learned and take out of working on projects such as this, which are present today in the master program that I lead in the Netherlands and underpin my UNESCO chair. We talked a little bit about these the other day. I won't go into them in any detail now. These things are present in what you're about to see. So next slide. So what happened was I was commissioned to make a piece, or to work with these young people. I had to work with them separately, Catholic group one night, a Protestant group another night. So on Tuesday night I'd go to the town of Ballymena, I'd go to the Catholic area, and I'd work in a Catholic youth club with a group of about 10 young people, young boys, young girls, different ages. It was really very big age groups. But I also, what was happening in those meetings, in those times, was I was also working with the youth workers. And at times, I was also working with members of the families, because they were interested and intrigued to see what was going on. But before a brush or a pencil was put to paper, I had to spend 6 weeks playing pool, throwing darts, eating chocolate, eating pizza, watching terrible television programs and movies, and building a relationship with these kids. and offering them the chance to take me, who's a stranger to the town, and show me their world. And I spent a lot of time playing football as well, and all sorts of things was going on. Anyway, so after 6 weeks, they knew I was there to do a project, and they were keeping me at bay a little bit, but after 6 weeks we began to start what could be called, I don't think it is the work, I think the football and all that's the work as well, but start doing this stuff. And the idea that we came up with was that the question would be asked of each group, what do you think the other side think of you? And how would that look like in terms of pictures and symbols? And if it does look like that, could you collect those pictures and symbols and bring them to me? And we'll photograph them, or we'll photocopy them, and we'll put them in an envelope, and I'll bring them to the other side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite the other side to make a painting about you on your behalf. And then, if we're really nice about it, this, and we're good together, at a given point in time, we'll bring those paintings together and we'll share them. We'll pass them over. But like what you've done on Thursday, actually. Think about it. So, that went on for a period of time. Images which are real stereotypical images came to the fore for the Catholic community. You're going to see a lot of green, a lot of white, a lot of orange. Symbols related to Celtic culture. Symbols related to the football teams that are supported in the Irish side community. That is Glasgow Celtic and Glasgow Rangers. Next slide. Yeah, and then you see these sort of like really Protestant images, red, white, and blue. The sort of colours in the first piece of research that the kids as young as 3 wouldn't touch. But here we are, a few weeks later, working through art. And these kids weren't just touching them, they were actually painting them. They were drawing them, they were inventing them, they were making them into artworks. Next one. This is a great photograph because the wee girl here with the plaited hair, it's actually wearing a Glasgow Rangers shirt. And she's painting Glasgow Celtic as well. That's one of my big victories. There you go. Next one. See, yeah, as I say, you got these stereotypical images emerging of the Virgin Mary on the left-hand side. People in Liverpool maybe probably do know about King William or King Billy. In the Netherlands, they don't know anything about him. Yet he's Dutch. I keep saying to them, you started this. So the next one. So what happened after a period of weeks? They made the paintings. I worked with them. I used my skills to be able to help them do this and brought them along on it. I'm part of the process. I'm part of the process of change. So I'm doing the work as much as they're doing it. And we really got a lovely collaboration going on with each other. What I didn't say was, I don't want to dramatise this too much, but it is the truth of the matter, is in the group of kids was this lad here, was the cousin of Michael. And the wee girl who's a blonde girl, I can't see her in this here, she is there. That was his girlfriend. So that both communities are really in this piece of work. You know? So they brought the, sorry, going back. they brought the painting. This is the offer. This is the opportunity where I offered them the chance. Do you want to bring it to a neutral space and we'll give it over to the others? And they really liked their paintings. They were really proud of them, so they wanted to bring them. So we organised a residential, an overnight in a place called Corrymeela, just north actually of Ballymena, a beautiful place on the coast, north coast of Northern Ireland. And it's a peace centre, so they give us this space, this beautiful space free. But all these kids had a bunk beds and stuff like that, and loads of sweets and chocolates and all that sort of stuff. And we all came together, and the youth workers had to do a lot of work to prepare us, of course, with the families as well. If here will happen, a bunch of Catholics meeting a bunch of Protestants, who knows what could happen? It just might get on. It just might get on. And they were really proud of the works, and they carried in the paintings to set them up, as you can see, and then they're sat down and put them under photograph too. Next one. And the key moment came, and I'm ready for time here. I'm talking a bit too much. Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so the key moment came whenever I'd done this, as we do in our work. It's sort of like what I know now as a kind of a descent. It's a moment where I disrupted the normal flights of journeys that these kids were on, and stepped in and said, what would happen if I said you can change this? You can paint a different story. What would happen if you done that? And someone went, I'm not touching it. I spent 3 months painting this thing, it's beautiful, I'm not going anywhere near it. And I said, well, what would happen if you could do that? And we had a discussion about it, and they agreed to take a vote. Nothing like a bit of democracy. Nothing like a bit of democracy. But we didn't have CNN and all that stuff, supporters, and the Russians weren't doing any intervention. They took a vote, and the vote was really close, in actual fact. So say, for example, there was 10. I think something in the reason of around 12 voted to change it. It's left a sizable minority who didn't want to change it. A bit like the peace agreement the other day I talked about, when you had over 700,000 people voting against the agreement. So there was quite a sizable minority that didn't want to change it. So what do you do? The question is, what do you do with that minority? You have to work with that in some way. So we began to discuss what we could keep on the painting and what we could lose. So moving on. This is some of our discussions. Yeah, this has come out wrong because this is the PDF thing. It's not the slideshow that I wanted to show you, so it's a wee bit mixed up. So this actually happened after we decided to make the change, where they're talking about words which they believe had contributed to the killing of Michael. And the one thing that I was told at the outset of this project, whatever you do, don't mention Michael. Whatever you do, don't mention. Stay away from that. That's just going to go too far with it. I mean, what was the point, really, of doing the work if we weren't going to talk about the reason why I worked in the middle? That was the whole point. And the kids themselves wanted to talk about it. And it was the first time they really had discussed, you know, and what I heard was a lot of confusion, a lot of fear, a lot of mixed emotions from both sides of the camp, in actual fact. So they began to select these words that they thought should be integrated into the artwork. Then, beautifully, they decided to change the symbols. They changed the visual language of it. Explain. And they presented different images, which they had worked out and negotiated as a group. Not the images that had been projected onto them, you could say, by this so-called identity culture that we're working with, this corrupted identity culture. That makes no sense. And then the ones that they kept, they want to keep parts of it. Remember, there was a large percentage that didn't want to paint over this thing, so we used masking tape to cover over these parts, and then paint it over. One next slide, please. Yeah, here we go. And then the next slide. And then paint it over the surface of the painting. There goes the Virgin Mary. God bless it. And the next one. Yeah. So this was a process that took place in the morning, I think we had 2 nights. In the morning of the second day. So the decision was made on the night before that we were going to change this thing. The next day was about what are we going to change it into. And also about how are we going to represent that large percentage of voices who didn't want it to change. And this was the answer. So moving on. The new images, you see that girl, Michael's girlfriend, making the drawing of the tree. And this is these 2 boys drawing the tree into the picture, the new picture. Go ahead. And more happening. Go ahead. Yeah, this is probably the most emotive image, really, here. Because that was a representation of the coffin of Michael and the broken cross. So much amazing. See, the language is incredible, you know. And it doesn't really surprise me that they had this depth of language, because in Northern Ireland in particular, but I think generally now, the sort of complexity of the visual language is beyond belief. And young people are really on top of this, and they understand it much better than we do. So they were at this a few number of years ago. Excellent. I'm nearly there. And you can see some of the words which they say needed to be in this painting. Fear, education, family, school, hatred, MLS, the politicians. Yeah, nice. Division, barriers, sectarianism. These were words which they wanted to incorporate into the artwork. Excellent. And just, yeah, there they are again, put into it, as you can see. Moving on. Then once the work was finished, they started to unpeel the tape that was painted over it to protect it, certain parts of the city. Next. You got this sort of thing happen. This messiness, I call it messiness of peace building, and that's really messy. I'd love to see what the next slide is, but yeah, there it is. So the question that was asked, and what's the biggest reason, what's the biggest contribution to the death of Michael, and to this stuff keep going, and you can see what they chose, it's right in the middle. School, source of education in itself. School, source of education in itself. I said that was the biggest thing this contributes to this type of behavior, these type of attitudes. Which brings me really nicely back to the point that I made in the preamble. About 5 minutes, huh? Thought I'd best. It's great. So, next one. So here's our considerations, and we look at the piece of work that we've just seen. Are we seeing a critical dialectical process? Yes. Are we seeing this notion of equality without a doubt? Is it transformative? I think it was. Was it radical? It certainly was radical. Was it essential? It was. On a number of occasions, but particularly when I made that intervention and asked, do you want to change it? Do you want to change it? It was vulnerable. Those kids were vulnerable. I had to hold. I was vulnerable. I had to be held. We had a fantastic team of youth workers who were working with us the whole way through this process. And they changed. We all changed because of it. As the rhizomatic, it was, by and large, made up as we went along. It looks like it was designed, but there was a lot of making up as we went through it. There was design. Contextual, yes, set in the context of the death of the young fellow, in the very time when that young fellow had died. It was site-specific. It was creative and it was realistic. I couldn't do much more than what I'd done. I told them that from the outset. We have a limit to what we can achieve here. And it was really driven by material in the end. And the finished artwork became something that was then shared and showed in different places, different schools. And it was actually showed at a conference in Ballymena, where I was asked to go and talk. I think it was my first year at Goldsmiths. And I was asked to go and talk at this conference about this work. I said, why do you want to talk to me? Whenever it was them who made it, why would you want me to be there? And I said, because, well, you know how it works. It's expected, and so I went, but I went with them. And we stood on the stage, and I made the opening address, and I walked away and said, it's all yours, now you can tell them how you got this one. And I sat and watched all these politicians and these so-called civic leaders sitting, squirming. Like Alex Ferguson says, itchy bun time, they were squeaky bun time, they were squirming in their seats. Show they bloody well shoot. Yeah, and then we see this other thing when we move forward to what I'm doing now with this chair, this notion of diplomacy must be focused on peace. This was, and I think, with me taking the images from one group to another, it's what they call shuttle diplomacy. We are taking the narrative of another side to the other side without them actually coming together, creating the conditions by which they can come together. And the artwork created those conditions. I think it was a pretty effective approach to conflict prevention. Was it sustainable? I don't know. I really don't know. But what I do know is that way may not be right, it may not be perfect, it may not be, but it starts a conversation. And I'm starting to think about us moving toward a more meaning-centered approach to education. And it doesn't mean to say that the child or the student is not central. It is their meaning. But we're taking the focus away from the sort of idea of self-centeredness, which I have seen dominated, frightened the life out of me in my job now. I've seen it when I was at Goldsmiths. I'm seeing students and teachers becoming this sort of, it's unreal. I'm have to stop it. Maybe have to stop it. And I think by putting meaning in the centre, it asks us to just consider there could be a change. And we want to be change. Is there another slide?
I think that is it.
Yeah, that's it. So thank you.